Hello there. You're watching the Beats Save the World YouTube channel, and today we're going to be taking a look at the song Leave the Door Open by Silk Sonic, Bruno Mars, and Anderson .Paak. The reason I wanted to look at this song is because I think it's really inspirational for songwriters, because there's a lot of unique stuff in this song that we don't see in a million other songs, at least not in a million songs that are made today. There's a lot of cool chord progressions, a lot of borrowed chords, changing keys, just really interesting stuff if you're trying to build your own sound. So there's a lot to unpack here, and just to avoid overwhelming everyone, I decided to make this a multi-part video. So in this first part, I'm going to go into kind of the intro and how I suspect they built this chord progression and just some stuff we can learn related to that. So let's get right into it. So when the song starts, we get this kind of chord progression that we hear a lot throughout the song. It goes something like this. I don't know if you can see my fingers here. So as far as my ears can tell, and my ear training is not perfect, but to me, here's what it sounds like. It sounds like we're starting off with an F major 7 chord, playing it like this, and then we're going to a G major chord played over the F note, so I'm playing like this, and then I think we're going to an E minor 7 chord, and then to an A minor 7 chord. So you kind of hear these chord names and you think, yeah, I mean, you can play the same chords. Like if you're covering this song, you can play those chords in the intro. But what I find more interesting is trying to understand, why did they use those chords? You know, like you can easily copy the chords, but do you really know what purpose they serve? For the moment, just so that we don't get so like caught up on, oh, this note in the bass and this is minor 7, just so we don't get caught up on this, I want to kind of show that you can get some of the effect if you just played normal chords. So like, I know there are 7s and there might even be some 9s in there, but for a second, let's just consider the basic chords. So really, what's going on, if we ignore the 7s for just a second, we've got an F major chord, we've got a G major chord, an E minor chord, and then an A minor chord. So how do we understand this? Because I also want to go into, like, how would you build a chord progression like this? So really, we're in my opinion, sometimes what key you're in is a bit subjective, but in my opinion, we're in the key of A minor here. The reason I say that is because when that A minor chord hits, it really feels resolved. Like it feels like everything is kind of building up, and then you hit the A minor chord, and that's where it feels at rest. Like, right? So like, you know, if we're playing it with kind of the original voicings, like, then this. Don't you get that feeling of like when the A minor, it's like the end of the story, right? It's resolved. And that's, to me, how I tell what key something is. It's like, where does it go to when it's at rest? So I think it's an A minor. So let's understand it knowing what key it's in. So really, if we're in A minor, the first chord, we would call that the 6th chord. So if we're just thinking about basic chords, if it's basic, we would think that we're starting with an F major chord. So using Roman numeral notation, like thinking functional harmony, this would be the 6th chord. So what I want to understand is, why would you start a song with the 6th chord? And by the way, the reason it's called the 6th chord is because if you just count in a scale, so we're in A minor. If you think of an A minor scale and you count the 6th note, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 6th note is F. So this is the 6th chord because it's an F major and the 6th note of the A minor scale is F. Okay, that's why it's called a 6th chord. So why would you start with this? Well, the 6th chord in any major or minor key belongs to the mediant family. So I'm not exactly sure where that term came from, but what you have to understand is that the 3 and the 6 chord, so the 3 chord and the 6 chord, they both share 2 notes in common with the root chord. So we're in A minor, so the root chord is A minor. We have to understand the 3 chord and the 6 chord both share 2 notes in common with that A minor chord. So that means that they sound a lot like the root chord, okay? But there's just something a little bit off. So they have that kind of feeling of sort of being at rest, but there's just something a little bit off. Like, it's like the start of a romantic comedy movie, and usually you don't start a movie with like full action. Usually it starts largely at rest, but there's just something that's a little bit unresolved, you know, like the protagonist is having some kind of problem in their life. That's, to me, the character that the 3 and the 6 chord give. So we're starting this with a 6 chord, right? And it's because you want to kind of introduce the plot without sounding like the story's already over, which is sometimes what the root chord can do. If you start on the root chord, it's kind of like you have nowhere to go from there. So I think one really useful thing if you're trying to start a song, just try the 3 or the 6 chord, because the 3 chord or the 6 chord, you can find that by taking the key. And if you want the 3 chord, it's based on the 3rd note of the scale. So that would be, right, 3rd note. So in this case, a C major. I'm just building it with the notes of the scale. And then in this case, the 6th chord is an F, because if we just take the 6th note of the scale. So that's, I think, why it's really good to start a chord progression on that chord. So then where does it go? So we're starting on the 6th chord, and then we go to this G major. Well, really, it's more like a G over F, but we'll get to that. For now, just thinking about the triads, if we're starting on a G major, what's that? So the G major in this case is the 7th chord, in my opinion. So since we're in A minor, if you count the 7th note of the A minor scale, you'll get a G. And then if you build a chord based on that, G major, that's the 7 chord, because it's the 7th note of the A minor scale. So what does it do? Okay, the 7th chord the 7 degree, not the same as like a G7, okay? But the 7th chord of a scale, it's part of the dominant family. So its job, generally, it's one of 2 chords that has the highest tension. So the 5 chord is the other chord in this family that has a similar amount of tension. So both the 5 and the 7 chord, they want to resolve to something, okay? So they often sound at their best when they're building up as if they're the climax, and then they go to something with less tension. So then what happens? Then we go to this E minor. This E minor, so a second ago I was saying the 7 and the 5 chords. So, you know, take the scale, count the 7th note of the scale, and then that's the 7 chord. Count the 5th note of the scale, that's the 5 chord. These chords both have the highest tension. They're part of the dominant family. So this E minor chord is kind of its cousin. It's the other chord in the dominant family. So to me, the effect of going from the 7 chord to the 5 chord, it's a way of creating movement without really changing the emotion. So you can feel there's movement there, but it still has the same character as the previous chord. And the reason you'd want to do that is like a build-up. I really like the dance music genre, and we have all these build-ups like do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. It's kind of like that, because once you're hitting this 7 chord, it wants to resolve to something, but then you're doing a 5 chord. So you're kind of refusing to resolve it, and you're keeping the tension. And then that tension finally meets a payoff, because after this chord, after this 5 chord, it finally does resolve to the root. So it's like, let me just kind of make a story out of this, like the story that the music is really telling with these chords. So when we start with this F chord, it's like you're introducing the story and you're fairly relaxed, but that you can just tell something is off. With this G chord, the 7 chord, we're really getting into some tension. You can feel like something is just going on and something needs to happen. And then we go to this. it's refusing to resolve, you know? Like, it just wants so badly to go somewhere, but you're just not letting it, and you've just built up all the tension, and then finally you resolve it. So it's a story, really. And I think that's a good way to construct chord progressions. You know, think of it like a narrative arc, and I think that's what they've done here. Now, one thing that I'll say, as we hinted in the beginning, these chords are not just normal triads. It's not just like F major. There's some other notes. So this F major chord is actually an F major 7. So sounding like this. So it's got this. So to understand this, the way we make a normal chord, just like a major or minor chord, is we take the scale of that chord. So if, you know, F major, that would be the F major scale. And then we combine notes, skipping every second note. So the F major scale is like... So to make an F major chord, we would take the first note, skip the second note, take the third note, skip the fourth note, take the fifth note. So you have... And that's how you make an F major chord. You can also take the 7th note of the scale. Now, this is not the same as when I was saying the 7 chord. What I meant before was the Roman numeral 7. So within that key, the 7th note of that key. But now I'm thinking relative to a chord. So it's a different frame of reference. Before it was relative to the key. Now it's relative to the root of this chord, okay? So now, if we're thinking about extending a normal chord into more of what it sounds like in that song, the first thing that we would think to do is adding the 7th. So we just talked about how a normal chord has the root, the 3rd, and the 5th. Well, if we're taking this F major scale, we can also add a last note, which would be the 7th degree of that F major scale. So then we'd have... Or if I put it all together into a chord, it would sound like this. So why would you use a 7th chord? Like, why not just use major and minor chords? When you add a 7th chord, it adds this more sophisticated, unsettling feeling. It makes it sound less characteristically happy and sad and more like a subtle emotion. So if you want your songs to sound less kind of in your face and more kind of laid back and more like you have to think about them, this is where a 7 chord can really be useful. It can also be used to add tension. So it just kind of makes the chords sound a little bit less black and white, a little bit like there's something more going on, like there's more beneath the surface. So all we have to do, before we were saying that the chord progression could be thought of as F major, G major, E minor, and A minor. All we have to do now, so for the first chord, we just add a major 7th on top. Now, so one thing you might come to know is that there are also different types of 7ths. So, you know, we could have a major 7th, and we can also have a dominant 7. So a major 7th is like what I just played, and a dominant 7 would be more like this. In this case, you can tell which chord would actually be in the key just by checking if that note that you're adding as the 7th is within the key. So if we're in the key of A minor, the note we're adding as a 7th is an E, and the note E is in the key of A minor. So that's why we're doing a minor or a major 7th in this case instead of a dominant 7. It's because the dominant 7 is not in the key. You can just check that by checking what notes are in the scale. So that's the first chord, and then we go into this G major. But I want to go into what we mean when we say that it's actually a G major over F note. The way I think of this chord is that it's really just a G dominant 7. And like I said before, in this case, just like the last case, the reason it's a dominant 7 and not a major 7 is because when we add that 7th note, if we made it a major 7, we'd be using a note that's not in the key, which you can do. But as a starting point, try the notes that are in the key. So in this case, if we just use the A minor scale and we take notes from that, we're going to end up with a G dominant 7. But in this song, the reason it sounds a bit different is because this 7 that we're adding, we're taking it down an octave. So we're just playing the notes in a different octave. And then so it's really just a G7, but we're playing this note in a different octave. So far we have this F major 7. Then we have this G major over F, which is really just a G7. It's just that the 7 is in a lower octave. Then what do we have next? Then we have this E minor 7. Same concept as the F major 7. It's just that if we're using the notes of the A minor scale, which is, this song is in the key of A minor, so we're generally using the notes of the A minor scale. If we use those notes and we start on F and skip every other note, start on E and skip every other note, we'll end up with an E minor 7. So we're just, again, so I know I'm repeating this over and over, I just want to make it really clear. If we take this A minor scale, and then we find the note E, so I'm just going to go down the A minor scale. Take the note E, and then skip every second note. In this A minor, so we're playing the A minor scale starting on E and skip every second note. We get this. And that's where that chord comes from. We're just taking those notes. Last chord is just this A minor 7. Same concept. It's just the A minor that we talked about, right? The root chord of this key. And then we're just adding a 7th to it. And we're using the minor 7 because it's just inside the A minor scale. Later on, we're going to talk about some notes that are not in the key, but for this part, that's really all that's happening. And then finally, I just want to talk about the part right before Bruno Mars comes in. This, like, you know, the parts, we should be dancing, romancing, and that kind of element. So really, that's what I would call resolving to the relative major. So we talked about how, you know, the 5 and the 7 chord, they want to resolve to that root. If you're in a minor key and you want an extra happy resolution, like you find that the normal resolution still sounds a bit anticlimactic, you can resolve to the relative major. So in any minor scale, there's a major scale that has the same notes, okay? So if you notice, if we play an A minor scale, it sounds like this. But those are the same notes as a C major scale. So if you want this extra kind of happy resolution, you can, instead of resolving to the relative minor, you can go from either a 5 or a 7 chord, or you can go from the relative minor to the relative major, okay? So that's what's happening there. They're going from the relative minor to the relative major. So the relative minor in this case is just the root. They're going from the root of the key to the relative major because it just provides an extra happy resolution. And then Bruno Mars' parts comes in, and then that's where the modulations really start. So I don't want to talk about that in this video just because I don't want to have too much stuff in here because, you know, nobody watches more than half of a video anyway. So I figure I may as well put the important stuff at the beginning, but hopefully that was kind of insightful to understand how you can build a chord progression and what's really going on in the beginning of Leave the Door Open. I really enjoyed analyzing the song, and hopefully you found something helpful too. So thank you for watching. Talk to you next time. See you later.